Welcome to the Tom Woods Show, episode 360. For a while now, I've been wanting to talk to somebody about a movement that's been around for, well, I guess some time now, but that is all over the business schools and particularly the business ethics courses, and that is this thing called corporate social responsibility. Well, it so happens that our friend Jim Otteson just recently received some wonderful professional news that is in fact relevant to all this. He's recently been appointed to a position in business ethics. I'll let him give the news. But suddenly I realized, wait a minute, Jim Otteson is our guy. He's the guy to talk to about this. It suddenly dawned on me as a result of hearing his wonderful news. So I've brought Jim back onto the show to talk about business ethics. How would a free market person teach business ethics? How is business ethics traditionally taught these days? Or that is to say, how's it being taught in your typical business ethics course? Jim Otteson is executive director of the BB&T Center for the Study of Capitalism and teaching professor of political economy at Wake Forest University. He's also a senior scholar at the Fund for American Studies in Washington, D.C., a research professor in the Freedom Center and Department of Philosophy at the University of Arizona, and a research fellow at the Independent Institute in California. You can follow him at jamesotteson.com, O-T-T-E-S-O-N. I'll have a link to that, to the BB&T Center for the Study of Capitalism, to books written by Professor Otteson, to related episodes. I'll have his previous appearance with us. I'll have the episode on corporations in general. I'll have the episode on the environment with Walter Block. So if you haven't checked out the show notes pages yet, you are in for a real treat. They are really, really great. They're packed with information and resources that help you get the most out of each episode. So the link today would be tomwoods.com/360. All right, here's my conversation with Jim Otteson. Enjoy. Jim Otteson, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Tell us about your recent promotion, because it was this wonderful professional news that you just received that gave me the brilliant idea for our conversation today.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I've just been named the Thomas W. Smith Presidential Chair in Business Ethics here at Wake Forest, in the School of Business at Wake Forest University.
Well, that really is wonderful, and congratulations. No doubt it's due to the Tom Woods Show bump that you got several weeks ago.
I'm sure that played a role.
Well, anyway, I thought that would make for an interesting conversation, the general subject of business ethics, simply because there are legitimate questions to be answered in a free society regarding business ethics, and yet the way this field is taught tends to be, well, as I suppose you would know firsthand, extremely biased and ideological and agenda-driven. I know at least one business ethics professor who says that business ethics, unfortunately, is taught by commies, as he put it. In fact, I suppose I don't know that many business ethics people, but I know only two who teach or taught it from the point of view of a sympathizer with the free market, and that would be Nick Capaldi at Loyola University, but I know him only a little, and I haven't talked to him in many years, and I don't even know if he still teaches. And then the late Father James Sadowski taught it at Fordham, and he was an outright Rothbardian, so no commie he. Okay. What is your impression overall of this field?
Well, the first thing to say is that oftentimes when I talk to people about business ethics, one of the first reactions they have is, oh, there is such a thing. Right. And I think that gives you some indication of, or at least a preliminary indication of what the field is like and what goes on in the field. One problem that the field faces, I think, is that for a long time, and almost every business school has a business ethics course, but often they are not a central part of the curriculum. The students don't see what the point of them is. Sometimes the faculty don't see what the point of them is, and that's a problem. And it's also a problem because if you look at the syllabi that faculty use when they teach those courses, they're all over the map. There doesn't seem to be any parameters to the field, no single narratives or themes that unite the field. And in a lot of the particular classes, what you get is a series of cases. So what you'll look at is one case of a business that made some bad decisions, and then another case of a business that made bad decisions, and you get a whole series of these. And that can give the impression that businesses are really exceptionally prone to being bad, that they're filled with bad actors, that business is really about trying to exploit other people, and that the field of business ethics, therefore, that its primary goal is to try to curb the natural excesses and vice that business otherwise engages in. But what you don't often get is any sense of the positive value that business can provide. And this is, I think it's captured in the common sentiment that people have about the idea that business needs to give back to society. I mean, if you think about that, giving back, when you tell your children you need to give that back, you tell them that when they stole something.
Right.
So if people think that business needs to give back, what that seems to betray is some kind of moral suspicion. It's the idea that, business is inherently morally suspect, that business activity is inherently morally suspect, and we really need to keep a close eye on them, a close watch on people in business. But I think the field of business ethics would be much better served, and business would be much better served, if instead we sort of, we flip the perspective. Instead of looking at the handful of celebrated cases where bad decisions are made, the Enrons of the world, et cetera, we think about all of the ways in which honorable business actually provides genuine value to other people.
Let's look at one way to approach the subject of business ethics, and a really fashionable way to do it, and that is to raise this campaign of to try to promote something called corporate social responsibility. And this indeed does sound like the giving back to society thing, but I think it's well beyond that. What is corporate social responsibility all about? Obviously, it's about a lot more than corporations striving to be honest and above board in the way they interact with the consuming public. It's much, much more than that. It has to do with what they do with their profits and how they invest them and how they donate them and so on and so forth. Can you tell us about this? I get a lot of questions about this.
Yeah, the field of what's now known as corporate social responsibility. So this is an idea that's probably approaching 40 years old or so. But the general idea, it's motivated as something of a response to an article that Milton Friedman wrote some decades ago that was called "The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase Its Profits." And in that article, Friedman argued that the job of the purpose of forming a firm is to generate profit, and that you measure a firm's success on the basis of whether it actually creates a profit or not. And he explicitly addresses this issue of, say, a CEO who decides to take some portion of the business's profits and turn it to charitable purposes. Friedman argued that this was a misunderstanding of the purpose of a firm and something like a end run around shareholders who invest in a company because they want the value of their shares to go up, not because they want the value of those shares to be compromised for charitable purposes. That was Friedman's argument, and the idea of corporate social responsibility is really to counter that. It's the idea that corporations should exist not only for a profit, but should also exist to benefit and improve their communities more generally. And that usually is taken to mean two things. One, that they need to engage in charitable activity of various kinds. And more recently, in the last, 20 years or so, the other major concern has been that corporations should be stewards of the environment. They should be conscious and what's usually called socially conscious in ways that achieve various kinds of moral or environmental or charitable goals that people have, that they shouldn't be focused only on generating value to shareholders or generating values to their customers, their clients, et cetera. So the whole field of corporate social responsibility, or the whole investigation of corporate social responsibility, is how can we put pressure on businesses to be willing to forego some of their profit because or out of respect for other kinds of goals that society more generally values.
Now, if you were to say that to the average person, I don't think the average person would find that terribly objectionable, particularly the environmental aspect, because at least a reasonably educated person would say that at least the way the protection of the environment is set up these days, you can't capture in market prices the full extent of the effects that you're having on the natural environment. So maybe it's good that we put this form of pressure on corporations because it's really the only way to provide for environmental protection.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and the praise is for companies that are environmentally conscious or that are socially conscious in various ways. That makes a good argument. But I would push back a little bit on the last thing you said about whether that's the only way to change corporate behavior or to guide corporate behavior. I mean, one of the great things about the genius of the marketplace is that people vote with their dollars. If there are companies that are engaging in practices, whether that be labor practices, employment practices, environmental practices, whatever they are, that customers don't like, it's very easy to go across the street to a different company. And if businesses are, after all, in the business of making a profit, well, they have to be very sensitive to the preferences and the values and the moral purposes that their customers, their consumers, their clients have. So this actually exerts quite a strong pressure on businesses. And I think a lot of the companies today that, which is basically all of them that are in one way or another environmentally conscious, and they like to trumpet it on their websites and they put it all over their PR materials. The reason for that might not so much be out of a respect for corporate social responsibility as an academic or scholarly idea, but because they're responding to consumers' interests. They're responding to what their customers want. So a very powerful way to encourage firms to not only provide the goods and services that you want, but to do it in the way you think is the right way to do it, is to patronize the ones that are doing it the way you like and not patronize the ones that aren't doing it the way you like.
And of course, as some, I guess, both libertarian and conservative policy commentators have said, if there are ways that the legal system can be arranged, that we can figure out who the perpetrators are when it comes to pollution. Sometimes in case of pollution, you have so many potential malefactors, it's hard to know who exactly is responsible. If we can narrow this down and we can have individual responsibility for these things, then you get the genius of the marketplace working again. You get the rule of law working on your side. There are different ways you can approach this question as opposed to just left-wing badgering. And on the general subject of left-wing badgering, what is the significance, in your mind, of the fact that we're talking about corporate social responsibility instead of individual social responsibility? Corporations typically pay out dividends to shareholders. Why aren't we saying to the shareholders, you shouldn't just take that money and go buy a private jet if you've got a big dividend check? You should give it to the Sierra Club or whatever. Why aren't we talking about individual social responsibility?
Well, I think that's a good and fair question. I mean, that goes back to part of the argument that Milton Friedman made, which was that if the CEO of a company is concerned about, let's say, the environment or some other social value, what he should do is write a check out of his own pocketbook to support those causes instead of taking corporate funds to do it. And that raises a bit of a larger level issue, which is, even if we all agree, let's say, that protecting the environment is a good thing, and we might disagree or have arguments about which other social values are the ones that people should pursue, but clearly there are things other than just a profit that people care about in the world. The larger question to ask is, well, what's the best way to address that? Is asking companies, firms to dedicate some of their monies in those directions. Is that the best or most effective way? And that's a much harder question to answer. Going back to the idea of the way the market works, because people have so many options about where to work and where to spend their money, where to invest, what you get is a kind of capitalizing on people's decentralized and localized knowledge. So no one person, no one firm is making decisions for everybody. Instead, you have millions of people making millions of decisions about where to allocate their resources, and these can exploit the knowledge that individuals have about their own schedules of value and their own hierarchies of purpose, and these can be reflected in the marketplace. Now, that doesn't mean that the entire market will be determined by any one person, but that's a good thing. What we want is for a diversity of values to be expressed. And one of the great things about the market is that it allows precisely that. And the other part of the question you ask indicates something that we often forget when we're talking about corporate social responsibility. We often forget that there are trade-offs involved here. If you ask people, would you be willing to spend more money to buy environmentally conscious goods as opposed to non-environmental, say recycled goods as opposed to non-recycled goods? Everybody says yes. Very high proportions of people say yes. But then when they go into the store and they actually see the recycled napkins that are a little bit more expensive than the non-recycled napkins, which ones do they buy? They buy the cheaper ones. And that, I think, indicates not only are there trade-offs involved, because these things are costly. Various kinds of technologies that we think might be more environmentally friendly are costly. When people say one thing but then do another, now I'm talking about individual people, when they say they endorse various values, but then when they're actually practicing spending their own actual money, that doesn't always match up with the values they say. Well, that indicates that maybe the locus of responsibility, who we should hold accountable, might not so much be the corporations, who are, after all, just responding to consumer sentiment, but might be the individuals themselves. If you or I or anybody else thinks that protecting the environment is an important thing, we should put our money where our mouth is, our own money where our mouth is.
Jim, Thomas Sowell said years ago that something along the lines that a propagandist can say in one sentence what it would take paragraphs or pages to refute. And I find that to be so true of critics of the market. They've got a bumper sticker slogan, and they are going to hang on to that thing for dear life and just use it over and over again. And one of these slogans that is relevant to our conversation today is people before profits. What is a useful way to think about profits that helps us to defang this type of criticism?
Well, that's so you're asking me to respond to a sentence with a sentence. That's not easy.
Right, indeed.
Not easy to do. But one way to start, and this is, I think, actually a way to think about how to teach business ethics as well, is to ask. We all know, I think, by consensus now, we understand the productive power of a market economy. So market economies create more prosperity than any other system of political economy that we know of. And indeed, in the last 200 years or so, in real terms, the wealth that has been generated in market economies has been completely unprecedented in historical terms. So it delivers the goods, as it were, and that's the main promise of a market economy. But to address this point about people before profits, so yes, it generates prosperity, but it doesn't come at the expense of people in various ways. And there, I think I would go to a little bit more of a micro level. If you think about the way markets work, if you and I engage in an exchange, if you and I trade or associate or cooperate in some way, the only way we're going to do that is if each of us, from our own perspective, thinks we benefit. So market transactions are not only mutually voluntary, but they're mutually beneficial as well. And when you engage in these kinds of transactions, so separately you produce 10 units, I produce 10 units, together we produce 26 units, not 20, but 26. That's what market economies unleash. They unleash the possibility of far greater production. But here's the key about that, Tom, that when we start asking about people versus profits, where do those profits come from? Those profits are the result of human beings making choices in their own terms about how to improve their lives, given the situation they face, the opportunity costs they face. They're making actual decisions. So every particle of capital that's produced is produced by human labor. So I would argue that there's actually a much closer connection between profits on the one hand and people on the other hand. So they're not opposed. I would say that in a properly functioning market economy, they are united. So profits are very close to, so generating profits is very close to improving human beings' lives.
That was more or less what I was expecting you to say. I'm glad you said it. I wanted to get that out there. I also want to ask you, what would you have people read in a course of study on business ethics as opposed to what other professors might have people read? You have a book called What Adam Smith Knew, and I'm actually wondering if you might assign that book.
I do assign that book. That's an edited collection of readings that was inspired by the actual teaching of business ethics that I do. So the place to start there, I think, is first with, as I might say, with almost everything, you start with Adam Smith. You read the first couple of chapters of The Wealth of Nations, and what you get there is a description of how it is that under the rule of law with protections of private property, what you get is people who associate with one another. They divide the labor. Dividing the labor, other things being equal, leads to an increasing production of whatever it is you're working on. Increasing production, again, other things being equal, leads to a lowering of prices of whatever it is you're producing. And as that process is repeated across society, you have more and more goods being produced for lower and lower prices, which means that people's overall standards of living go up. So that's the place to start, to understand what a market economy is and how it works and what the role of a firm in it is. When you understand that, then you can begin to understand the power of this idea I mentioned a few minutes ago about honorable business. Honorable business is, of course, respecting the agreements you make. It's respecting other people's preferences and values and purposes. And it's looking for innovative ways to cooperate and associate with people to make not only your life better, but my life better, and then everyone else's life better too. This is the invisible hand argument of Adam Smith. So this is the way that a market economy works, and it's the role of a firm as a node of cooperation in a market economy. I think that's the place to start a business ethics class, with understanding at that larger level what exactly a market economy is, how it's supposed to work, and the role of firms in it. And then to begin to think about, well, what role do firms play in generating the kind of society we would like to live in, a society, let's say, a humane and just society. What some people ask is, well, is money the only thing that matters? Well, the answer to that obviously is no, of course not. But what wealth does do is enable people to turn their attention to things that do matter to them. So before 1800, when the average person was living on between 1 and 3 contemporary dollars per day, if that's all of the wealth you have at your disposal, 1 to 3 contemporary dollars a day, well, you're not thinking about what is justice. You're not thinking about what's my duty to God. You're not thinking about protecting the environment. What you're thinking about is, can my children eat today? What the market can do is enable people to improve their lives to an extent by generating some wealth and prosperity so that they don't have to be so concerned about whether I can eat today. These more basic concerns can be met. This allows them to turn their attention to what would actually constitute a life worth living. So business ethics as a field, I think what it should aim to accomplish is to induce in students an understanding of a market economy, an understanding of the role of a firm in a market economy, and then get them to begin thinking about what contribution they themselves can make when they take their occupation in business, whatever it is they're going to do. What role can they themselves play in generating productive value for others, so that others can begin to turn their attention to the higher things in life?
Jim, I think this is a very good answer, and I like the posture that you've adopted here. You'll find no objection from me, but I think at some level, people would say that in business ethics, there has to be, once you've balanced out this the type of attitude that you see from a lot of other faculty, where their emphasis is just on how terrible you students are likely to be if you don't finish my class, and the whole point of this class is to rein in your naturally rapacious desires. Once we've balanced that out, though, still there has to be some room somewhere for some thou shalt nots. What kind of thou shalt nots would you be teaching?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I think actually the place to begin with understanding an individual person, a business person's role in business, or a firm's role is always. I mean, I adopt the rule from the field of medicine. First, do no harm. So the first thing you do is you don't cause harm to others. So what are the shalt nots? The first one is, don't make other people's position worse. Wherever they started, wherever they were when you met them, when you came into their presence, don't make their position worse. And that's going to include a whole lot of other things. It means you're going to respect other people's equal moral dignity and autonomy. It means you're going to refrain from coercion, from threats, fraud, deception, unjust exploitation. But it also means you need to respect other people's values and their purposes and their preferences. And maybe I'll add one more to that. So it's not just honoring your promises, not just respecting other people, but there is also an important sense if we want to actually realize the gains that a market economy proposes, or that it argues on that people argue on behalf of market economies for. You have to have a sense of reciprocity. And by that, I mean, when you're dealing with other people in the business world, and this is probably true for just about anything, not just the business world, but you should actively avoid taking unfair advantage of other people. And the way to understand that is, if you were on the other side of the bargain, would you be willing to accept the bargain you're now striking? Now, if you tell students this, this resonates with them, this does seem like, this is a version of the golden rule after all, and it's called the golden rule for a reason. Because this is a way to understand and a way to determine whether what you're thinking about doing can actually benefit other people. Now, it's a localized benefit. You're not solving global poverty, or you're not solving global climate change or anything like that. What you're doing is looking at the person across the desk from you and saying, can I make this person's life a little better, even if only marginally? And if you're doing that, if each of us is looking for ways to do that, then this can provide a great deal of benefit society-wide.
Jim, I want to remind people that you are executive director of the BB&T Center for the Study of Capitalism at Wake Forest University. You're doing very interesting and important work there, and I'll be linking to that and to many other things on the show notes page for today, which is tomwoods.com/360. There I'll have links to, first of all, your previous conversation with us about your excellent book, The End of Socialism. That episode was a listener favorite. I'll have a link to my conversation with Walter Block about environmentalism, and just a bunch of things that are relevant to our discussion today. There are other issues in business ethics, I suppose, like insider trading that we could talk about at some point, but I have taken up enough of your time for today, and once again, congratulations for your advance in the field, and for your promotion, and for the continued success that you're having.
Thank you very much, Tom, and I will look forward to future conversations about insider trading and other things.
All right, everybody, tomwoods.com/360 is the place to go for all kinds of resources related to this episode. And, of course, the place to go to become one of the cool people who can debate, who can defend the liberty message, who knows history, economics, philosophy, the history of thought down cold. If you've got that down cold, it's because you've been a student at my Liberty Classroom, where you can learn on the go from people you can trust and learn all the things we should have gotten in school but never did. Don't use that excuse that you don't have time to master this stuff. Yes, you do, because you can learn it on the go the same way you listen to this show. Check it out at libertyclassroom.com using coupon code SHOW in all caps, and you will warm my heart, yes, but you will make yourself a formidable debater, and you'll be able to say, yeah, baby, yeah, now I'm where I want to be, brain-wise. All right, thanks for listening, everybody. See you tomorrow.
The Tom Woods Show.